Hello, everyone. I'm Samuel Chang, and I'm going to be recording a video today about annotating texts. This is Unit 1, Annotating and Close Reading Strategies, Section 1.1, Annotating Text. So today we're going to be annotating a short story called Through the Tunnel by Doris Lessing. And we're going to use several different annotation techniques, namely 6 of them that I'll list in a little while, of things that we're going to mark up with different colors. So hopefully you all stay tuned. So let me go ahead and get started now. Okay, so we're going to be annotating for 6 different things today. First of all, we are going to be annotating for words and vocabulary we don't know. And this is going to be in yellow. Second thing we're going to be annotating for is character traits. These are going to help us to figure out what each character does in the story and what each character acts like in the story, so we can kind of figure out why they do certain things. Next, we're going to use pink to annotate for symbolism. And then we're going to use red to annotate for color imagery. And this is a specific category just for this story because there are a lot of colors in this story that have hidden meanings. So we're going to use color imagery to annotate for that. In blue, we're going to annotate for evidence that leads to a theme. And in purple, we're going to annotate for key plot points. So what are the major things that happen in the plot of the story, and how do these affect the theme specifically? So with these in mind, let's go ahead and start on our story. So the way we're going to do this is we are going to, I have another copy that I annotated a little while earlier, and we're going to go through this whole story, basically line by line, and I'm going to read it to you and annotate as we go along, and then explain kind of why I did certain annotations. So I don't know if you all have read this story before, but you should probably pause this video at this point if you haven't read it before and read it once first before I get started, because that way you're going to understand why I mark certain things, and because we're not going to have a whole lot of time to go into super deep detail about the themes, especially if we're marking certain things at the beginning of the story that I personally know that will be significant at the end of the story, but you don't know if you haven't read the story. So I'm going to suggest that you pause the video here and read the story if you haven't already. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about background before we start annotating. That's always a good thing to think about before you get started doing any annotations on a story or even reading a story, is thinking about the background. So this author right here, Doris Lessing, if you were to look her up, you would get the information that she is a British author, and she writes novels and short stories. So this story is most likely going to be set in a beach in Great Britain. So there are themes throughout the story that are that compare dignity with, so to speak, not so dignified things that are happening. And then there are things throughout the story that compare like British norms with other countries' norms. So it's a good thing to kind of do some background research before we get started. So Through the Tunnel, we look at this title and we think, well, obviously there's going to be a tunnel, and obviously a boy may, or obviously a person rather, is going to be seeking to go through the tunnel. So we look for a theme maybe that looks for a boy seeking to go through a tunnel or some kind of struggle that they seek to go through. So that's one of the themes we'll be looking for. And I'll go ahead and tell you I found 3 themes in this story, so we'll talk about those a little bit after we finish annotating the story. So let's go ahead and get started. I want you all to focus specifically on words and vocabulary you're not familiar with. So let's go ahead and get started. Going to the shore on the first morning of the vacation, the young English boy stopped at a turning of the path and looked down at a wild rocky bay. So we see this wild rocky bay is likely going to be some sort of symbolism in the future. So let's underline that in pink so we can keep in mind its significance in the future. And then over to the crowded beach he knew so well from other years. So right here we know that he's been in this beach before. His mother walked on in front of him carrying a bright striped bag, another piece of color imagery we see here in one hand. Her other arm, swinging loose, was very white in the sun. The boy watched that white naked arm and turned his eyes, which had a frown behind them. Now that shows us something about the boy. So we're going to underline that as a character trait in green. And if you want to see this paper specifically, I'm going to scan it and attach it next to the video so you can look at that. And the character trait we see here is a frown, right? But let's read on. There's more in this one sentence about his character. Had a frown behind them, towards the bay and back again to his mother. When she felt he was not with her, she swung around. "Oh, there you are, Jerry," she said. She looked impatient, something about the mother, then smiled. "Why, darling, would you rather not come with me?" Would you rather? She frowned again, so both the boy and the mother are frowning. And then we have a word here we might not know. And the word here is conscientiously. Conscientiously, you could look this up on your own. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that it means she's paying attention. So she's actively worrying. So she's conscientiously worrying over what amusements he might secretly be longing for which she had been too busy or too careless to imagine. He was very familiar with that anxious, apologetic smile. So this little section right here shows us a whole lot about the boy and his mother, right? So we see here that the boy is kind of scared of making his mother unhappy. So he cares about his mother, and his mother cares about him. She's conscientiously worrying about his amusements, right? She wants to keep him safe. So continuing to look at this, we see another word we're not too familiar with, contrition. Now, sometimes you have to use context clues to figure out what contrition means. So let's look at some context clues that we see around here. So around here, he is thinking, well, I should go with my mother, right? Because his mother is saying, would you rather not come with me? So she's obviously asking him, well, do you want to go by yourself and do something? But contrition kind of means a sort of remorse, or a sort of that he doesn't want to make her unhappy. He's kind of sorry to make her unhappy. So it's saying here that contrition sent him running after her. That means that he really wants to go by himself, but out of contrition, out of feeling sorry for his mother, he continues to go with his mother, and we'll see why in a little while. And yet, as he ran, he looked back over his shoulder at the wild bay. Here's another piece of symbolism we see. And I'm not going to talk too much about the passage because we're going to have videos in the future talking about how to take notes over the passage. This video is simply about how to annotate. So that's a piece of symbolism we see. And all morning as he played on the safe beach, he was thinking of it. So we underline these two for the simple reason because we see in the same sentence, we see a wild bay and a safe beach. And we can look at the connotations of bay and beach. A bay is a beach is obviously sometimes humans, make it easier to play on a beach, right? They pour sand over it. They kind of dignify it, if you will. And a wild bay is kind of just, a bay that has not been touched. It's a piece of nature, right? So wild bay versus safe beach there. The next morning, when it was time for the routine of swimming and sunbathing, so there's a routine they have here. Probably every summer as they come, they have a daily routine of swimming and sunbathing. His mother said, "Are you tired of the usual beach, Jerry?" So we have a little evidence that points to a theme here, our first little piece, the usual beach. So we're going to see what theme that points to later on. Would you like to go somewhere else? Oh no, he said quickly, smiling at her out of that unfailing impulse of contrition. So there's a lot of weird words in that. So quickly smiling, that characterizes the boy, right? He doesn't want to make his mother unhappy. And we have two words here, impulse of contrition. So as soon as his mother asks that question, he quickly smiles, showing kind of his impatience or his unwillingness to even make his mother a little bit unhappy. And then he has that unfailing impulse of contrition, meaning every single time he has something that might make his mother unhappy, he has an impulse to make it up. So he really loves his mother, right? A sort of chivalry. Chivalry is, of course, I always think of the knights in the past where they would help, they would help the needy and the poor. That's sort of chivalry. So the boy is kind of feeling an obligation to help his mother. Yet walking down the path with her, he blurted out. So he can't stand it anymore. He's blurting this out. I'd like to go and have a look at those rocks down there. What does that mean? Well, I underline that in purple because it's a key plot point. He's finally getting the courage to tell his mother, I don't want to go with you anymore. I want to go and have a look at those wild rocks down there. And then it says she gave the idea her attention. And I would underline that as a character trait because, she's obviously paying attention to the boy and what he wants to do, but I would be underlining mostly everything. So let's just go on from there. She gave the idea her attention. I'm just going to underline one word here. It was a wild-looking place. And obviously, that's contrasting with the usual beach we underlined up here, the usual beach here. So it was a wild-looking place, and there was no one there. But she said, of course, Jerry, when you've had enough, come to the big beach, or just go straight back to the villa, if you like. She walked away, that bare arm, now slightly reddened. That might be a character or color in the future. That might be a piece of imagery from yesterday's sun swinging. And he almost ran after her again, feeling it unbearable that she should go by herself, but he did not. Up to now, we're seeing the consistency in their character. She was thinking, of course, he's old enough to be safe without me. So that's another character trait. She was thinking, so she's a person of thought. He's old enough to be safe without me, so, he's growing up. She's wanting to allow him some more freedom, right? Now, safe without me. It's another bit of a theme, and I'm going to introduce the theme here. So the theme is independence, or even danger in some cases, and independence from his mother versus the protection and safety that his mother's always given, right? So think about that theme, and what other things support that theme. Have I been keeping him too close? This theme kind of relates with her character. He mustn't feel he ought to be with me. I must be careful. He was only a child, 11 years old. She was a widow. This is a huge piece of character trait, right? So it's introducing the boy as a child, 11 years old, and her as a widow. So we can glean some sort of knowledge from that, like why is she acting this way, or why is he acting this way, right? So they take care of each other, and because he doesn't have a father and she's a widow, so they've learned to take care of each other. She was determined to be neither possessive, and most of us should know what possessive means, but possessive means protective or keeping him close by, right? Nor lacking in devotion. She went worrying off to the beach. Off to her beach, rather. As for Jerry, once he saw that his mother had gained her beach, what does gained mean? Well, it means her, with context clues, it means his mother had, arrived at her beach. He began the steep descent to the bay. From where he was, high up among red-brown rocks, we see a lot of colors in this area. I'm going to go ahead and underline all the colors we see in this area. Right? There's a whole lot of colors that might or might not come in handy in the future, but we're going to underline all of them anyway. Lots of colors. So he was high among the red-brown rocks. It was a scoop of moving bluish green, fringed with white. What does fringed mean? Well, fringed means bordered, right? There's white around the bluish green. As he went lower, he saw that it spread among small promontories and inlets. What are promontories and inlets? Well, promontories are sort of pieces of rock that jut out into the ocean. So think about if you have a bay, right? A bay just runs smoothly, let's say, and then you have a promontory or a little piece of rock that kind of juts out of the bay into the ocean. So you can walk on that piece of rock. That's kind of, a small, jut out. And what is an inlet? Well, an inlet is kind of the opposite, right? You see an inlet that comes inward, right? It goes, say you have a bay here, but it's kind of a little piece of rock that goes inward, and the ocean water goes into the little inlet, right? So it's saying this bay is obviously not smooth. It's not very safe, right? A rough, sharp rock. This is going to be a piece of symbolism in the future, because it symbolizes, the theme of independence, right? And the crisp, lapping surface showed stains of purple and darker blue. Finally, as he ran sliding and scraping down the last few yards, he saw an edge of white surf and the shallow, luminous movement of water over white sand. And beyond that, a solid, heavy blue. So in this one paragraph, we've seen so much, we've seen so much imagery, right? We've seen colors, we've seen the sharpness of the bay. We've seen so much stuff that really gives us a picture in our mind of what kind of bay he's facing. And I've annotated a lot on this first page, and you don't have to underline every single thing I've underlined, but just underline what you think will be useful to writing your essay in the future. He ran straight into the water and began swimming. He was a good swimmer. Here's another character trait. This is going to be really important in the future because most of this surrounds most of the story surrounds swimming. So let's go to the next page. He went out fast over the gleaming sand. There's another piece of imagery, right? Or color imagery. Gleaming sand. And over a middle region where rocks lay like discolored monsters. Now, this is really great color imagery, but it makes us think a little bit. Is this just color imagery, or is there more to it? We'll see. Under the surface. And then he was in the real sea, a warm sea where irregular cold currents from the deep water shocked his limbs. Now, you see from this paragraph that the author uses such, deep words and such, descriptive imagery to kind of give us a really whole picture of what's happening here. When he was so far out that he could look back not only on the little bay, but past the promontory that was between it and the big beach, he floated on the buoyant surface. And buoyant means, conducive to floating. So a lot of things are gonna, float on it. It kind of floats stuff. I want to say it that way. So the buoyant surface and looked for his mother. There she was, a speck of yellow under an umbrella that looked like a slice of orange peel. This sentence right here, again, supports the theme of his mother and of course, his independence from his mother versus his protection and safety from his mother. So we see right here that she's sitting under her umbrella in her safe beach, whereas he is, risking himself to play on the dangerous beach. So he swam back to shore, relieved at being sure she was there, but all at once very lonely. On the edge of a small cape. So what is a cape? Well, similar to an inlet. Small cape that marks the side of the bay away from the promontory was a loose scatter of rocks. Among them, some boys were stripping off their clothes. They came running naked down to the rocks. So there's another symbolism there. And what is the symbolism? Well, the symbolism is a sort of showing like they're wild, whereas he and his mother were dignified, right? They are not of the same kind of culture or the same kind of background as him and his mother. So the English boy swam towards them. So now we know that the boy was English, but kept his distance at a stone's throw, so that he was still kind of scared of them. They were of that coast. All of them were burned smooth, dark brown. And he was English, and so he's white. So we have a difference there. And speaking a language he did not understand. It's going to be a bit of symbolism right there. So that language kind of shows, again, the difference that he has between himself and these boys. To be with them, of them, was a craving that filled his whole body. So that's another character trait. He wants to feel belong. Like, he wants to feel like he belongs, right? And of course, he's, he only has his mother. He didn't have a father. So he might have felt in the past, and we're just guessing at this point, that he doesn't belong, right? He swam a little closer. They turned and watched him with narrowed, alert, dark eyes. Then one smiled and waved. Here's a little plot point, and I only underlined 4 or 5 of these throughout the whole story in purple, because, then one smiled and waved kind of symbolizes, they're accepting him. So this is the point where he feels accepted by these boys, whereas in the, in the past and even in the future, he doesn't feel accepted. It was enough. In a minute, he had swum in and was on the rocks beside them, smiling with a desperate, nervous supplication. Now, what does supplication mean? Well, supplication is going to mean a kind of servitude. So it's asking kind of, or begging for something, kind of humbly, right? So he is kind of desperate to, have their support, have their, engagement, that he is kind of, scared of them not accepting him. So he's kind of begging them to accept him. They shouted cheerful greetings at him. That's another character trait of them. So they're cheerful boys, or so we think at this point. And then as he preserved his nervous, uncomprehending smile, uncomprehending meaning he doesn't understand them because, they're speaking another language. They understood that he was a foreigner, strayed from his own beach. So this kind of represents that he's not one of them, still, even though they've accepted him. And they proceeded to forget him, meaning he had become one of them. They don't, pay special attention to him anymore. But he was happy. He was with them. They began diving again and again from a high point into a well of blue sea. There's another little color there. Between rough, pointed rocks. We underlined this a bit earlier, I believe. After they had dived and come up, they swam around, hauled themselves up, and waited their turn to dive again. They were big boys, men to Jerry. He dived, and they watched him, and when he swam around to take his place, they made way for him. So he felt he was accepted, and he dived again, carefully, proud of himself. He has pride. There is another character trait right there about the boy. That's going to come into handy later on, too. Soon, the biggest of boys poised himself. What does poised mean? Well, he got ready. He got ready to do something. He kind of had a position about him. Poised himself, shot down into the water, and did not come up. The others stood about watching. Here's another key plot point. Jerry, after waiting for the sleek brown head to appear, let out a yell of warning. But they looked at him idly and turned their eyes back towards the water. This is another major event that happened, right? He was part of them, but then, he got worried, whereas they knew what was happening. After a long time, the boy came up on the other side of a big dark rock, letting the air out of his lungs in a spluttering gasp and a shout of triumph. There's another character trait there. Immediately, the rest of them dived in. One moment, the morning seemed full of chattering boys. The next, the air and the surface of the water were empty. There's a symbolism right there. It's empty. The boy is feeling lonely again. But through the heavy blue dark shapes, which were the boys, right, could be seen moving and groping. So they were, of course, underwater. They were trying to get past, the rock there. And we're going to talk more about how they got past the rock in the future. Jerry dived, shot past the school of underwater swimmers, saw a black wall of rock looming at him. He touched it and bobbed up at once to the surface, where the wall was a low barrier he could see across. There was no one visible under him in the water. The dim shapes of the swimmers had disappeared. Then one and then another of the boys came up on the far side of the barrier of rock, and he understood that they had swum through some gap or hole in it. He plunged down again. He could see nothing through the stinging salt water but the black rock. When he came up, the boys were all on the diving rock, preparing to attempt the feat again. And now in a panic of failure, so he's realized, he's not as good at swimming as them. And of course, back in the last page, we saw he was a really good swimmer, but now he's in a panic of failure. He's not as good as them. And that kind of shows us that he is not a boy that likes to fail, right? He likes to succeed in what he does. And he has his own confidence as well. So going to the next page, the boy said in English, "Look at me, look." And he began splashing and kicking in the water like a foolish dog. Here's another turning point in the story, kind of. They looked down gravely, frowning. So they weren't happy at him. They didn't treat him as part of their own anymore. He knew the frown. At moments of failure, when he clowned to claim his mother's attention, it was with just this grave, embarrassed inspection that she rewarded him. Through his hot shame, feeling the pleading grin on his face like a scar he could never remove. Ooh. He looked up at the group of big brown boys on the rock and shouted, "Bonjour, merci, au revoir, monsieur, monsieur." Right, this is all French, and I might not be pronouncing that right because I don't speak French. But we see he's desperate here. And this is French. He's desperate at getting their attention. He's like, "Are you all French? Are you all English? We don't know who you are," right? He just said in English up here, "Look at me, look," right? So are they French? Are they English? He doesn't know, right? So he's just shouting in French now. While he hooked his fingers round his ears and waggled them. Water surged into his mouth. He choked, sank, came up. The rock, lately weighted with boys, seemed to rear up out of the water as their weights were removed. They were flying down past him now into the water. The air was full of falling bodies. Then the rock was empty in the hot sunlight. He counted 1, 2, 3. At 50, he was terrified. They must all be drowning beneath him in the watery caves of the rock. So he's worried now. At 100, he stared around him at the empty hillside, wondering if he should yell for help. He counted faster, 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 to hurry them up and to bring them to the surface quickly, to drown them quickly, anything rather than the terror of counting on and on into the blue emptiness of the morning. So he doesn't have a lot of patience, right? So everything quickly, right? He wants stuff to go quickly. And he was in terror. And of course, the theme here, or the kind of color theme here, is the blue emptiness of the morning. Again, the emptiness, right? The loneliness that he feels. And then at 160, the water beyond the rock was full of boys, blowing like brown whales. They swam back to the shore without a look at him. So he's no longer included, because he didn't dive with them. He climbed back to the diving rock and sat down, feeling the hot roughness of it under his thighs. The hot roughness. The boys were gathering up their bits of clothing and running off along the shore to another promontory. They were leaving to get away from him. He cried openly, fists in his eyes. There was no one to see him, and he cried himself out. So there's another key plot point right there, right? To get away from him. So he was no longer included. They had strictly, gotten away from him. They don't want to be with him anymore. And he cried, of course. And we can see crying himself out as kind of symbolic of him never maybe being accepted because of who he was. So let's keep going. It seemed to him that a long time had passed, and he swam out to where he could see his mother. Yet she was still there, a yellow spot under an orange umbrella. So there's another, piece of evidence, again, the yellow spot under an orange umbrella. He swam back to the big rock, climbed up, and dived into the blue pool among the famed and angry boulders. So the blue pool again. So he dived in among the famed and angry boulders. Down he went until he touched the wall of rock again. But the salt was so painful in his eyes that he could not see. He came to the surface, swam to shore, and went back to the villa to wait for his mother. There he's relying again on his mother's protection and safety. Soon she walked slowly up the path, swinging her striped bag, the flushed, naked arm dangling beside her. I want some swimming goggles, he panted, defiant and beseeching. Beseeching meaning he is begging. She gave him a patient, inquisitive look. So that shows something about his mother, right? And she said casually, well, of course, darling. But now. So the boy was now in a big rush. Why? Well, we'll see. He must have them this minute and no other time. He nagged and pestered until she went with him to a shop. Pestered meaning, of course, annoying her. As soon as she had brought the goggles, off running down the steep path to his goggles, he grabbed them from her hand as if she were going to claim them for herself and was off running down the steep path to the bay. The goggles are another, symbolic item in this story because the goggles represent like his determination. You'll see in a little while what else his determination makes him do. Jerry swam out to the big barrier rock, adjusted the goggles, and dived. The impact of the water broke the rubber-enclosed vacuum, and the goggles came loose. He understood that he must swim down to the base of the rock from the surface of the water. He fixed the goggles tight and firm, filled his lungs, and floated face down on the water. And obviously, he's going to spend a while, figuring out how to get past this rock. Now he could see. It was as if he had eyes of a different kind. Let me get to the next page here. The fish eyes that showed everything clear and delicate and wavering in the bright water. So there's another color right there, the bright water. Under him, 6 or 7 feet down, was a floor of perfectly clean, shining white sand, rippled firm and hard by the tides. Because that's what water does to sand, right? Have you ever been on a beach? The water makes the sand hard. 2 grayish shapes steered there, like long, rounded pieces of wood or slate. They were fish. He saw them nose towards each other, poised motionless, make a dart forward, swerve off, and come round again. It was like a water dance. A few inches above them, the water sparkled as if sequins were dropping through it. Fish again, myriads. What does myriads mean? Well, most of us should know this, right? Myriads means, lots, a whole bunch of fish, right? The length of his fingernail were drifting through the water, and in a moment he could feel the innumerable, again, the same meaning there, so many he couldn't count, tiny touches of them against his limbs. It was like swimming in flaked silver. The great rock the big boys had swum through rose sheer out of the white sand, black, tufted lightly with greenish weed. Lots of colors there. He could see no gap in it. He swam down to its base. Again and again he rose, took a big chest full of air, and went down again. Again and again he groped over the surface of the rock, feeling it, almost hugging it in the desperate need to find the entrance. So we see his determination here. That's another character trait you see. Again and again. And then once, while he was clinging to the black wall, symbolism there, representing his independence, right? His knees came up and he shot his feet out forward, and they met no obstacle. He had found the hole. He gained the surface, clambered about the stones that littered the barrier rock. Stones again. We saw stones in the past, and I've underlined, most occurrences of stones in blue because, that represents the theme. Stones really represents, the competition, he has with those boys in his own mind, even though they're gone already. And, of course, his independence now. He gained the surface, clambered about the stones that littered the barrier rock until he found a big one. And with this in his arms, he let himself down over the side of the rock. He dropped with the weight straight to the sandy floor. Clinging tight to the anchor of stone, he lay on his side and looked in under the dark shelf at the place where his feet had gone. He could see the hole. It was an irregular, dark gap. Another color there. But he could not see deep into it. He let go of his anchor, clung with his hands to the edges of the hole, and tried to push himself in. He got his head in, found his shoulders jammed, moved them in sidewise, and was inside as far as his waist. He could see nothing ahead. Something soft and clammy touched his mouth. He saw a dark front moving against the grayish rock. And panic filled him. He thought of octopuses, of clinging weed. He pushed himself out backward and caught a glimpse, as he retreated, of a harmless tentacle of seaweed drifting in the mouth of the tunnel. But it was enough. He reached in the sunlight, swam to shore, and lay on the diving rock. He looked down into the blue well of water. He knew he must find his way through that cave or hole or tunnel and out the other side. First, he thought he must to control his breathing. He let himself down into the water with another big stone in his arms so that he could lie effortlessly on the bottom of the sea. He counted 1, 2, 3. He counted steadily. He could hear the movement of the blood in his chest. 51, 52. His chest was hurting. He let go of the rock and went up into the air. He saw that the sun was low. He rushed to the villa and found his mother at her supper. She said only, "Did you enjoy yourself?" And he said, "Yes." That shows us something about the mother and the boy as well. The mother kind of only cares about if the boy enjoys himself, right? She doesn't ask about his safety. All night, the boy dreamed of the water-filled cave in the rock, and as soon as breakfast was over, he went to the bay. So this shows how much determination he has. He thinks about it all night, dreams about it, and then he goes back to the bay immediately after he wakes up. That night, his nose bled badly. Nose bleeds. That's going to be a bit of a theme throughout as well, this latter part of the story. I'm sorry, I didn't push this up. You can't see. So that night, his nose bled badly. For hours, he had been underwater, learning to hold his breath, and now he felt weak and dizzy. Now is the place his mother asked about his safety. His mother says, "I shouldn't overdo things, darling, if I were you." Just a simple reminder, not really telling him he can't do it, but just a simple reminder that he shouldn't overdo it. That day and the next, Jerry exercised his lungs as if everything, the whole of his life, all that he would become, depended on it. I'm going to underline this right here. Such determination. That shows something about the boy, right? Not everyone has such determination. Again, his nose bled at night, and his mother insisted on his coming with her the next day. It was a torment to him to waste a day of his careful self-training. Now, we usually use torment as a verb, right? But here we have torment as a noun. So torment is kind of, a state of suffering, right? So he was kind of suffering the whole day because he couldn't continue his careful self-training. But he stayed with her on that. Other beach, which now seemed a place for small children. Let's think about this. Place for small children. So after he has gained some sort of independence from his mother and he's experienced this danger, the place where he used to stay when he was a child becomes to him like, a place for small children. A place where his mother might lie safe in the sun. It was not his beach. Let's underline this. It was not his beach. A turning point here. He no longer sees that as his beach. Not ask for permission the following day to go to the beach. That shows something about the boy, right? He's so determined, he doesn't really care about what his mother says anymore. And now we see his beach. The other one was not his beach. Now this one is his beach. He went before his mother could consider the complicated rights and wrongs of the matter. A day's rest, he discovered, had improved his count by 10, meaning, the amount of time he could stay underwater without breathing. The boys had made the passage while he counted 160. He had been counting fast in his fright. Probably now, if he tried, he could get through that long tunnel, but he was not going to try yet. A curious, most unchildlike persistence. Saying here, well, we probably don't know sometimes what the word unchildlike means, but you can infer from the word itself that it means that he wasn't acting like a child anymore. Unchildlike persistence, okay? A controlled impatience. Shows something about the boy. To some, case, So to some extent, he is a kind of childlike, but then in some cases, he's really mature, right? It's saying a controlled impatience, meaning he has it under control. He knows what he's doing. Made him wait. In the meantime, he lay underwater on the white sand, which kind of symbolizes here, safety, right? He wasn't in the water. He's on the white sand. Littered now by stones he had brought down from the upper air, and studied the entrance to the tunnel. He knew every jut and corner of it, as far as it was possible to see. It was as if he already felt its sharpness about his shoulders. So there's another little piece of symbolism. So the sharpness about his shoulders. He sat by the clock in the villa when his mother was not near and checked his time. He was incredulous. Incredulous meaning extremely surprised, right? And kind of unbelieving. He doesn't believe that he can hold his breath for 2 minutes. The words 2 minutes authorized by the clock brought close the adventure that was so necessary to him. In another 4 days, his mother said casually one morning, they must go home. Casually. So that means she didn't know, what determination he had to get through that tunnel. She doesn't know. So she said casually, they must go home. There's another turning point. So that kind of, so he was determined, but now he feels a sense of urgency. It's urgent that he get through that because he is about to go home. On the day before he left, or on the day before they left, he would do it. He would do it if it killed him. Such determination. Another, thing from the author to enforce how determined he was, to get through that tunnel. He said defiantly to himself. Defiantly means, he's, not listening to anyone else. He's stubbornly saying that to himself. But 2 days before they were to leave, a day of triumph, when he increased his count by 15, his nose bled so badly that he turned dizzy and had to lie limply over the big rock like a bit of seaweed, watching the thick red blood flow onto the rock and trickle slowly down to the sea. He was frightened. Supposing he turned dizzy in the tunnel, supposing he died there, trapped, supposing his head went around in the hot sun, and he almost gave up. He thought he would return to the house and lie down. Next summer, perhaps, when he had another year's growth in him, then he would go through the tunnel. So now he's, kind of regretting because he's kind of afraid now. He's going back and forth between danger and protection, right? He doesn't know where he's going to stay, right? But even after he had made the decision, or thought he had found himself sitting up on the rock and looking down into the water. And he knew that now, this moment, when his nose had only just stopped bleeding, when his head was still sore and throbbing, this was the moment he would try. If he did not do it now, he never would. Interesting. He was trembling with fear that he would not go. And he was trembling with horror at that long, long tunnel under the rock, under the sea. So he felt his obligation to go, right? He was trembling with fear that he would not go. So he's afraid of himself losing determination, but he's also, really afraid, of the long tunnel. He's afraid that he might drown. Just kind of going back and forth. Even in the open sunlight, the barrier rock seemed very wide and very heavy. Tons of rock pressed down on where he would go. If he died there, he would lie until one day, perhaps not before next year, those big boys would swim into it and find it blocked. And as much as he's scared of that outcome, he almost thinks, I almost think that he feels that if the big boys find him dead in that little jut, at least they would, remember him, right? They would remember him as one of their own. Remember him as, the person who was brave enough to go through and sacrifice his life for it. And, we kind of feel that that's kind of silly, right? Just, to get through a little rock, just for a bit of competition with the other boys, he sacrifices his life for that. But that's kind of what the story gets at. That's one of the themes. He put on his goggles, fitted them tight, tested the vacuum. His hands were shaking. Then he chose the biggest stone he could carry and slipped over the edge of the rock until half of him was in the cool enclosing water and half in the hot sun. He looked up once at the empty sky, filled his lungs once, twice, and then sank fast to the bottom with the stone. He let it go and began to count. Here's a big, little leading idea in this little section, this page. It's counting. And you saw the leading idea of counting, throughout the story. Like, he's counting how long he can stay underwater. But, throughout his big adventure throughout this page, going underwater and, his determination, you're going to see how important counting is to him. He took the edges of the hole in his hands and drew himself into it, wriggling his shoulders in sidewise as he remembered he must, kicking himself along with his feet. Soon he was clear inside. He was in a small rock-bound hole filled with yellowish gray water. So we see here that there's another color. The water was pushing him up against the roof. The water was sharp and pained his back. He pulled himself along with his hands, fast, and used his legs as levers. His head knocked against something, and a sharp pain dizzied him. 50, 51, 52. You see counting there again. He was without light, and the water seemed to press upon him with the weight of rock. 71, 72. There's counting again. There was no strain on his lungs. He felt like an inflated balloon. His lungs were so light and easy, but his head was pulsing. He was being continually pressed against the sharp roof, which felt slimy as well as sharp. Again, he thought of octopuses and wondered if the tunnel might be filled with weed that could tangle him. He gave himself a panicky, convulsive kick. What does convulsive mean? Well, it kind of means instinctive, right? He is like, he's kicking out just like, out of instinct. He's not consciously kicking, right? He's not controlling his kick. He's just kicking, Ducked his head and swam. His feet and hands moved freely as if in open water. The hole must have widened out. He thought he must be swimming fast, and he was frightened of banging his head if the tunnel narrowed. Counting again. 100, 101. The water paled. Victory filled him. Something about him again there, a character trait. His lungs were beginning to hurt. A few more strokes, and he would be out. He was counting wildly. Here we go again. Counting. He said 115. And then a long time later, 115 again. The water was a clear green, jewel green around him. So let's put that in red because that's a character trait. Clear jewel green around him. Then he saw above his head a crack running up through the rock. Sunlight was falling through it. And the clean dark rock of the tunnel, a single mussel shell and a darkness ahead. He was at the end of what he could do. He looked up at the crack as if it were filled with air and not water, as if he could put his mouth to it and draw in air. 115. Again, we see he's repeating this 115 because he's losing hope. He heard himself say inside his head, but he had said that long ago. He must go on into the blackness ahead, or he would drown. His head was swelling, his lungs cracking. 115 pounded through his head. It's repeating the same number over and over again. I wonder what that means. And he feebly clutched at rocks in the dark, pulling himself forward, leaving the brief space of sunlit water behind. He felt he was dying. He was no longer quite conscious. He struggled on in the darkness, between lapses into unconsciousness. An immense swelling pain filled his head, and the darkness cracked with an explosion of green light. So he's finally out, right? The darkness symbolizing, a color symbolizing hopelessness. But he's finally out. His hands groping forward met nothing, and his feet kicking back propelled him out into the open sea. He drifted to the surface, his face turned up to the air. He was gasping like a fish. He felt he would sink now and drown. He could not swim the few feet back to the rock. Then he was clutching it and pulling himself on it. So he's kind of having lapses in consciousness, like he was just saying. He lay face down, gasping. He could see nothing but a red-veined, clotted dark. His eyes must have burst, he thought. We're seeing the theme of blood that, resounds throughout this next page. And the end of the story. His eyes must have burst, he thought. They were full of blood. He tore off his goggles, and a gout of blood went into the sea. His nose was bleeding, and his blood had filled the goggles. He scooped up handfuls of water from the cool, salty sea to splash on his face, and did not know whether it was blood or salt water he tasted. So what does a gout mean? Well, a gout means, just kind of a burst, right? A gout of blood went into the sea. It kind of all suddenly poured into the sea. And of course, the blood theme that we just saw is really important. Let's go on, right here. After a time, his heart quieted, his eyes cleared, and he sat up. He could see the local boys diving and playing half a mile away. Let's look at this. His heart quieted. His eyes cleared, and he sat up. So this is telling us that he's calmed himself down. He's kind of, fulfilled his dream, right? He's going to go through the tunnel. He's gone through it, and now, his burden is lighter now. His burden is, he let go of his burden now. He could see the local boys diving and playing half a mile away. He did not want them. He wanted nothing but to get back home and lie down. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that he's accomplished his stuff, but he did not accomplish it for the reason of impressing the boys. He accomplished it for the reason of what? For himself. Interesting. In a short while, Jerry swam to shore and climbed slowly up the path to the villa. He flung himself on his bed and slept, waking at the sound of feet on the path outside. His mother was coming back. He rushed to the bathroom, thinking she must not see his face with blood stains or tear stains on it. There's another theme of blood, but I'm underlining in red because, it's a color imagery too. He came out of the bathroom and met her as she walked into the villa, smiling, her eyes lighting up. "Have a nice morning," she asked. That's kind of a theme there too. Every time she simply asks him a really, it's kind of ironic. She simply asks him a really light question when he's just literally almost died. "Have a nice morning," she asked, lying her head on his warm brown shoulder a moment. "Oh yes, thank you," he said. "You look a bit pale and then sharp and anxious. How did you bang your head?" "Oh, just banged it," he told her. She looked at him closely. He was strained. His eyes were glazed looking. This all shows stuff about the mother and the boy, right? Sharp and anxious. "Oh yes, thank you. Oh, don't fuss. Nothing can happen." He was strained. His eyes were glazed looking. She was worried, and she said to herself, "Oh, don't fuss. Nothing can happen. He can swim like a fish." So she doesn't understand her boy. She doesn't understand at what risk he put himself, to get through that tunnel. She doesn't understand his determination. They sat down to lunch together. "Mummy," he said, "I can stay underwater for 2 minutes, 3 minutes at least." There's another evidence that, takes us to our theme, right? He's proud of himself. It came bursting out of him. He's still a boy. It's kind of a character trait throughout this story that kind of confuses readers like us, right? At times he seems so, dignified and so, determined, so adult-like. And then at times he seems so childlike, like he seems like he really wants to impress his mother, make her happy. We get kind of confused at this point. "Can you, darling?" she said. "Well, I shouldn't overdo it. I don't think you ought to swim anymore today." Again, she's, putting this really light question or light comment on the heavy stuff she's doing. So she doesn't understand that he's now a grown man, right? Another theme, she doesn't understand that he's now separating from dependence upon her and going to independence by himself, right? He's facing more danger as he goes on. She was ready for a battle of wills, but he gave in at once. It was no longer the least importance to go to the bay. He had fulfilled his own, thinking. And that's the end of our story here. And because he had fulfilled his own, determination to go to the bay, he no longer, asks his mother about this, It was no longer of the least importance for him to go to the bay. So throughout the story, we get a little bit confused about what Doris Lessing, the author, is trying to tell us, right? We don't know, is she trying to impress upon us, the adult nature of this boy? Because that doesn't really seem right either, because, he's still trying to impress his mother. Or is she trying to impress upon us, that his journey toward independence? That seems like a main theme. That's probably the first theme you or any reader would come across as they were reading this, because it's the most obvious one. But we don't really know exactly what she's trying to convey, right? So let's look. I have two major themes I found. A third one that I don't really think fits all that much, but two that I found. So themes here that I found are, first, the theme of competition between him and the boys. But then later on, this theme is kind of sort of refuted, right? After he realizes, well, I'm not doing this for the boys. And after we are told that he's not doing it for the boys. And then he's doing it for himself. So the second theme is independence versus safety, right? His independence kind of brings with it, a danger, a sort of, danger that his mother doesn't know about. And that danger, his mother, it's so obvious she doesn't know about it that it kind of brings it to our attention, because the author is kind of pointing out, well, she doesn't know about it. Oh my, right? It's bringing it to our attention. It's so obvious because her comments are so light. But it's showing the boy's individual journey, his own journey from, of course, the safety of his mother and the protection of the, safe beach, the children's beach, to the independence and the danger he faces from swimming and, spending his time at the rough bay. So that's kind of the story. We'll talk, I'm sure, more about the story in future videos, but that's kind of the essence of how to annotate the story. Remember, you can annotate in your own ways. There are, of course, some of the vocab words that I've underlined, of course, and then there are other words I didn't underline that you probably don't know. So, of course, underline those based on what you do and what you know, right? And whatever you have an idea of what you want to write, an essay about, I recommend you read the text first. Of course, do your first round of annotations. Probably do your first round of annotations with, words, vocab, character traits, symbolism, colors, and then read it once first with annotating for those four things, right? So let's just say read it one first, annotating for these four things, right? And then the second time, read it again. And then after the first time, kind of have a little thought in your brain about what you're wanting to write your essay about, what you want to focus on in your analytical essay. And the second time you read through, have that theme in mind, and then look for evidence to support that theme you've decided on. And, after you've read the story once, you kind of know the key plot points, that happen throughout, and what's important and what's not important. So keep those in mind as you annotate. You don't have to annotate the exact same way. You don't have to use 6 colors if you don't have 6 different color pens in your house. That's fine. But keep in mind that when you're annotating for your own good, because you want to be able to, go through the essay, go through the article or the short story and find pieces of evidence for your essay that you don't necessarily want to read the whole article again to find, right? Every time you want to find evidence, you don't want to read the whole article. You want to go by your annotations. You want to look, at, oh, there's a green annotation. I'm going to, use that as a piece of evidence for a character trait. Something like that, right? So do stuff based on what you think is best for you. And I've just given you a short example of or a long example rather, of how to annotate a 7-page short story. But of course you can use my methods, or you can develop your own methods, right? Everyone annotates differently. It's for your own good. So yeah, you can write a better essay. And in future videos, we'll talk about, how to write analytical essays. And, probably we'll talk either about this short story again or other short stories. And we'll talk about how, you write an analytical essay. And of course, how to use your annotations to help you write your essay. Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to send Ms. Joyner or myself an email to ask us. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.